On June 22, 2025, Pakistan's army chief nominated Donald Trump for the Nobel Peace Prize. The next day, the United States launched airstrikes on Iran. Pakistan condemned them publicly, called it a violation of international law, affirmed Iran's right to self-defense, and positioned itself as firmly opposed to American military action in the Middle East. 3 days later, Pakistan's army chief was having lunch with Trump in the White House cabinet room. The meeting, scheduled for 1 hour, ran for over 2. Then they moved to the Oval Office and kept talking. That sequence, Nobel nomination, public condemnation, private lunch, is not a contradiction. It's a strategy. And understanding it tells you more about how power actually moves in 2026 than almost anything else happening right now. I'm James Whitmore. Stay with me, because this story involves a country most people dismissed completely 4 years ago, and it ends with that country holding a leverage position nobody saw coming. In 2021, Pakistan was in a bad way. Diplomatically, economically, strategically, take your pick. The US withdrawal from Afghanistan, which Pakistan had been deeply entangled in for 2 decades, left Islamabad without its main source of strategic relevance to Washington. The relationship had already been corroding since 2011, when US forces found Osama bin Laden in Abbottabad, not in some remote tribal area, but in a military town, steps from Pakistan's premier military academy. The trust never fully recovered. After Afghanistan, it basically collapsed. Pakistan was surviving on IMF loans and goodwill from China, and serious analysts were writing about it in the same breath as failed states. Its foreign policy had essentially run out of road. What changed was something nobody planned: a military conflict with India in May 2025. Without going into the full details of that confrontation here, I'll cover it properly in a separate video. What it did for Pakistan diplomatically was counterintuitive. It forced Islamabad into a strategic reset. The old playbook of passive alignment with the US while hedging toward China and staying ambiguous on everything else wasn't working anymore. Pakistan needed to make a choice about what it actually wanted to be. What it chose to be was indispensable. The architect of that choice is Field Marshal Asim Munir, Pakistan's army chief, former head of military intelligence, and the man who over the past year has executed one of the more impressive diplomatic pivots of any military official in recent memory. Munir understood something specific about the Trump administration that others missed. Trump does diplomacy with individuals, not institutions. He prefers people who can take decisions immediately, who don't route everything through a foreign ministry, who show up and commit. Munir showed up. He committed. He got the direct line. The Nobel Prize nomination, which, yes, sounds absurd in isolation, was actually a calculated move. It was Munir signaling to Trump's circle, in the language Trump responds to, that Pakistan was on his side personally, even when it couldn't be seen to be publicly. The timing, the day before the Iran strikes, was almost certainly intentional. Pakistan was building a paper trail of goodwill with the White House for the moment it would need to spend it. And that moment came faster than anyone expected. When the US-Iran war began in late February 2026, it immediately created a problem that neither Washington nor Tehran had an easy solution for. How do you talk to someone you're actively bombing? Direct channels were politically impossible. Both sides needed a credible go-between, someone Tehran would trust to represent its concerns honestly, and someone Washington would trust to deliver messages accurately without spinning them. Pakistan was uniquely positioned for exactly that role, and here's why the combination worked. Pakistan doesn't recognize Israel. That's not a small thing from Tehran's perspective. It means Pakistan shares at least the broad diplomatic framing of Iran's regional grievances, even if it doesn't share its methods. Pakistan also borders Iran, maintains historical religious and cultural ties, and has its own incentives to avoid a prolonged war on its doorstep. Tehran could talk to Islamabad without feeling like it was talking to a Washington proxy. At the same time, Pakistan had the White House relationship it had spent a year building. When Munir called J.D. Vance, Vance picked up. That's not nothing. Most countries in the region can't say the same. So, on April 11, 2026, J.D. Vance and Steve Witkoff, Trump's Middle East envoy, flew to Islamabad. Not Washington, not London, Islamabad. Pakistan hosted the talks that produced the first meaningful US-Iran ceasefire framework. 2 months later, Munir flew to Tehran, met with Iran's parliament speaker, its president, and its foreign minister. Then he called Washington. Then the ceasefire held. And if you've been following this channel's coverage of the Iran deal negotiations, this is the piece that explains who was actually in the room when it mattered. The question worth sitting with, and it's the one almost no major coverage is asking, is what Pakistan actually gets in return for all of this. The short answer is that the transaction is still being negotiated, but the rough contours are becoming visible. The security pact with Saudi Arabia, signed after the India conflict, was part of it, a mutual defense framework with one of the wealthiest states in the world. Pakistan joined the Gaza Peace Board in January 2026, giving it a seat in a process that has enormous long-term regional significance. Minerals and technology discussions. Pakistan specifically talked AI, cryptocurrency, energy, and critical minerals in the White House meeting, suggest Washington is being asked to help Pakistan diversify its economy out of the IMF dependency cycle that has defined its last decade. Pakistan needs investment. Washington needs a reliable partner in a region that's increasingly complex to navigate. That's a transaction with legs. But the picture isn't straightforwardly positive for Pakistan either, and I want to be honest about the risks, because they're real. The balancing act Pakistan is running is genuinely precarious. On one side, the US relationship. On the other, China, which has invested somewhere around $62 billion in the China-Pakistan economic corridor and considers itself Pakistan's all-weather friend. Beijing has watched Pakistan's warming with Washington, with the kind of quiet displeasure it reserves for developments it doesn't want to make a public fuss about. For now, China needs Pakistan's cooperation too much to punish it. But Pakistan is making bets on Washington's reliability that it has made before and that haven't always paid off. The US has a history of needing Pakistan intensely, paying it generously, and then walking away when the strategic calculus changes, which is exactly what happened after Afghanistan. There's also the domestic dimension. Inside Pakistan, the army's diplomatic role is not universally celebrated. Pakistan's civilian political class has its own views about who should be conducting foreign policy. Munir is the army chief, not the prime minister. His access to Trump's inner circle exists because of his institutional position and personal relationship, not because of any democratic mandate. That creates tensions that may not surface immediately, but tend to accumulate. And then there's India. Washington has been trying to run two parallel strategies: India as its Indo-Pacific partner, Pakistan as its West Asia and Central Asia partner, treating the subcontinent as two separate strategic spaces. That works on a map. It's considerably messier when India and Pakistan are in active military confrontation, and both are supposed to be serving American strategic interests. The US is managing a contradiction here that it hasn't fully resolved, and Pakistan knows it. None of which diminishes what's happened. From pariah state on IMF life support to the country that brokered a ceasefire between America and Iran in 4 years is a remarkable trajectory. And the mechanism that drove it, Munir's personal relationship with Trump, the calculated Nobel nomination, the public condemnation of US strikes that bought credibility with Tehran, the private lunch that bought access to Washington, is a masterclass in reading what a specific moment in geopolitics actually requires and delivering exactly that. If you want to understand how power moves in 2026, not the declared power of alliances and treaties, but the actual leverage of whoever happens to hold the right cards at the right moment, Pakistan's story this year is one of the clearest examples available. If that's the kind of analysis you want every week, subscribing takes about 2 seconds and it genuinely helps the channel reach more people. What happens next for Pakistan depends largely on whether the Iran ceasefire holds and deepens into a real deal. If it does, Islamabad gets to claim a share of the diplomatic credit for one of the decade's most significant achievements. If it collapses, as previous ceasefire optimism in this conflict has collapsed, Pakistan's mediator role becomes much harder to sustain. You can't be trusted by both sides indefinitely if neither side reaches an outcome it can live with. But right now, in June 2026, Pakistan is in a position it hasn't occupied in at least a generation. Relevant, trusted by multiple parties who don't trust each other, and quietly leveraging that trust into something it has needed for years, a reason for Washington to care about its survival again. The army chief who nominated Trump for a Nobel Prize the day before America went to war got his lunch in the Oval Office. And then he went to Tehran and kept the conversation going. That's not chaos, that's a plan. This is James Whitmore. The Iran deal story is still unfolding. I'll be back when it moves again. Subscribe so you're there when it does.